Always in the back too.
Well, you know what?
Yeah.
It's like university.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't. I can't imagine.
It's the whole
He really wants to. I never knew what was going on, and you'd wake up for 5 minutes and have something like acrylics we need to say, so you just leave. Stay everybody on. Just one that you'll never hear from. They ask you a question, and all
It
of a
is like an
sudden,
additional burden, essentially sleeping and then pop up and drop some knowledge on everybody.
Never study.
No one wants to know all the time. I'd be a my mom needs to put me in the bar, so I'm a soccer bar. So I would make legal. So I would retrain that. Up and then you like work for
I still have to see it a bit, yeah, but it's pretty much done. I took it back to me.
Can you hear this okay? How about now? Does this work? If it's working, let me know. It's good? No, I'm just, does this go to the room? Hello, 1, 2, 3. Is this for the room or for the streaming? Because it's on, I don't know what else I'm supposed to do. Okay. It's picking up. Well, if people can't hear, we can do it to the room, but I'll try and talk a little louder when I get there. Okay.
My name's Anthony Graffin. I'm the provost here at Lyon College. Welcome to our very last faculty colloquium of this academic year. Today, put your hands together and welcome our very own Dr. Peter Staples.
All right, thank you for coming. And this might be a case where last but not least doesn't apply, but let's get started. So in the past, there's been some questions where the provost asked about people, and here's a couple of questions you can ask about me. I'll ask you, what is the most important minute in my day and why? Okay, the answers are the last minute, and the reason is because that's when everything gets done, or not. Sometimes it doesn't get done, but so I've got stuff I want to cover. I've broken some rules about having too many slides, so some of them I'm going to go through pretty quickly, but I will leave time to talk at the end. If you have stuff you want to talk about, I will be here for whenever. Okay, so let's, when I was doing this, Rose emailed me and said, what's the title of your talk? I had to think about it all weekend. So I came up with a couple of titles. My long and circuitous journey of figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. That wasn't pithy, so I came up with this one, The Long and Winding Road, but the Beatles had already taken that, so I had to maybe come up with how I ended up at Lyon College. Again, maybe a little bit vague, so you got what you got on the title. So I'm going to hopefully tie a bunch of things together and it will make sense at the end. So I'm going to share a little bit of personal stuff on my background that will be relevant, I think, when I get to the end of the presentation. So I grew up in a pretty large family. My parents actually married fairly late and still managed to have 7 children. They lost one in between, so there was a pretty big gap between me and my next brother. And well, what does that have to do with anything? I guess in one sense, my father had a pretty modest salary. He is, first generation college, but he went all the way. He went and got a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and then he got a veterinary degree and ended up doing research in veterinary medicine. And I guess one of the things that I got out of this is with a modest salary, we didn't have a TV. That wasn't a priority. So my brothers and sisters, I guess, taught me a lot of different things. So whether that's because they were bored or because they got out of other work by keeping me entertained, I don't know. But I learned a lot of different things when I was young. And so I had a pretty big variety of interests. We moved to North Dakota when I was 2. So that's mostly what I remember growing up. Here's a couple of pictures. I didn't take these personally because I didn't have time to go back in the archives, but would you like to open your door to that? Okay, and kind of here's the kicker. These happened in April. Okay, so in North Dakota, yeah, there's a lot of hard work to survive. I grew up around a lot of like second-generation Norwegian farmers, so I can do a Norwegian accent, but I'll save that for another time. So when I went up through high school in North Dakota, when I graduated or when I was getting close to graduating, the big question is, okay, what do you want to do with your life? Where do you begin? And some of you are still answering this question. So with college, a lot of it is choosing a major. So what did I choose? Well, or how did I choose it? This isn't the route I went, but a lot of people look at marketability as their jobs that pay well in this particular major. But there's some other things that are important, like, is it enjoyable? Do I really like this topic? And then capability is kind of important. Can I actually do this? Some people find that calculus and organic chemistry aren't their thing, and they're not going to get into medical school, so they have to choose other routes. So I started out with studying physics, actually, and I think my idea for doing that was I read all the science fiction books in my junior high library, and I was going to invent warp drive so I could travel to other stars. And I figured out that wasn't quite going to happen. Maybe it wasn't so important. I have a picture of Japan because I did, after my first year of college, did some volunteer work for my church in Japan, studied Japanese, and then came back and finished my degree. I'd learned quite a bit while I was there, so I ended up doing a second major in Japanese, switching my first major to mechanical engineering. So again, it doesn't seem very related, but it helped me actually get jobs a lot, having that foreign language skill, because when there was a job posting that, requirements for Japanese fluency and engineering degree, there wasn't a whole lot of competition for those jobs. Okay, so then I jumped ahead too far. So right after college, I did work an internship in Japan with a Japanese company. And I also had my first entrepreneurial experience, which I don't have time to go into, but after 3 years in Japan, I ended up coming back to the US for family reasons. And then I started a corporate job. So I got a job with a Fortune 500 company as a quality engineer. And after a couple of years there, I applied. They had a program where they would pay for continuing education. So I started an MBA program at the University of Chicago. The company was actually out in the cornfields in northern Illinois, but they had a weekend program. So every Saturday for about 3 years, I'd drive into Chicago and attend classes. And I learned a lot and got some interesting perspectives. So just a couple things I want to share. I heard this, not a direct quote, but in so many words, more than once during the course of my MBA program, is the responsibility of a manager is to maximize shareholder return on equity. Okay, I kind of stuck that in the back of my head. Okay, I'm an engineer, I'm not a manager, so put that away for now. Another one, this professor I definitely remember, he was very interesting, but he said management is a function, not a social status. And I saw that in the corporate world, where it was treated like a social status. I'm higher up the org chart than you, therefore I'm superior to you. But I started climbing the corporate ladder after the MBA. One of the reasons I went for the MBA is because as an engineer, we would kind of get together and talk about all the dumb things that management did. And said, maybe I can do better. And, in hindsight, I was naive and at the time didn't know that maybe they weren't so dumb. They were just motivated by different things. But anyway, I guess one of the things that wasn't too smart is they paid a lot of money for me to get an MBA and didn't have a career path. And so another company hired me. So I did get my first management job. Okay, and that, I worked that a while, and then the next rung in the corporate ladder took me to Japan. So again, there's some pictures. This is actually in northeastern Japan, area called Tohoku City. The big city there is called Sendai. So they have a famous Tanabata festival, it's called, and there's some pictures of the area. So that job, looked pretty good because I had never made it to the 1%, but I had top 5% salary, had personal assistant, stock options, executive bonuses, etc. And for the first time in my adult life, I really didn't have to worry too much about money. So we'll come back to this. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the power of business. Why do I have a pineapple? Any guesses? Besides, I like pineapples. I got this pineapple for under $2. And pineapples don't grow very well in Arkansas. Business makes it possible to have pineapples for very cheap. So I think it's kind of amazing that they can sell them and still make a profit for that amount of money. And yeah, for the economists in the room, they might be short-term loss production, but I don't think so because the price has been stable enough that they can bring things to us for low prices. And we have a lot of things that have raised our standard of living because of business being able to make things more efficient, more effective, and bring us products and services for a much lower price. Okay, what about entrepreneurship? So we think about entrepreneurship kind of as starting businesses. Here's one statistic. We think of the big employers are big corporations, which in terms of numbers they are, but as far as growth and startups, actually, small businesses are the driver behind job growth. Stat from the Small Business Association or Administration is about almost 2/3 of net job creation for the 18-year period listed was from small businesses, including startups. So they're very important to economic development. Also, startup firms drive innovation in many industries. It used to be, big corporations would have a lot of research and development departments, and some industries still do, but some have found it's a lot easier to dump the risk off on entrepreneurs. So, biotech, they can wait for a firm to get something good and then find the founder, wave a few $1 million in front of them, which is a nickel to a big corporation, and then there's their research. They bought it pretty cheap, actually. So if you're creating a business, where do you start? So I ask this sometimes in my new management class, why do you want to do business? A lot of them answer to make money. So you think about, okay, if you're going to start a business, I call this viability, but it has to do with you can get a positive return.
Excuse me.
You can earn money from it. We'll come back to that later, but entrepreneurial thinking is a little bit different. It's looking at problems as opportunities. So think about, why did you spend money this week? Most of you spent some money this week. To eat, okay.
Coffee.
Coffee, stay awake, okay. But if we lump that all into one category, essentially we're solving it. You wanted to solve a problem. You had a problem. You're hungry, you're sleepy, you're bored, whatever it is. You spent money to solve a problem. And that's the idea behind entrepreneurship, is to find solutions to a problem. And so where do you begin? And this comes from both like new product development, and you can use it in startup literature. But the first point you should look for is desirability. So what does a customer want? What are they willing to pay for? What solves their problem, in other words? This is, the beginning of the solution. If you go with, okay, what can I make money from? You're probably going to miss the things. But if you start with a solution that's desirable, then you can go to the other things. So we call that in the voice of the customer. A lot of times, what is the customer saying they want? And do you do it better than anybody else? Then we have to look at feasibility. So this has to do with technology. Can we actually do it? My warp drive idea was very desirable to me anyway, wasn't very feasible. So that kind of shuts it down. And then finally, we need to look at viability. Is it financially sustainable? Can you actually, earn more money than it costs to produce it? So the idea is, if you can hit that sweet spot in the middle, then you have a successful product or a successful business launch. Okay, so we can kind of correlate this with career. Kind of looks similar, right? Career, I like it, somebody will pay money for it, and I'm capable of doing it. In business, talk about the bottom line. So the accounting students should know what that refers to. It's the bottom line.
You're making a profit.
Yeah, so on the income statement, the very bottom in double underline, that's your net profit. If it's a positive number, then that's good. If it's a negative number, not good. It's a little harder with career, but what is success? Big salary, company car. A little tougher to define, but again, a lot of people define that in monetary terms. So let's think about what motivates entrepreneurs and what motivates employees. Famous quote by Adam Smith, kind of the father of modern economics. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, the baker that we expect our dinner, but from regard to their own self-interest. Again, maybe taken a little bit out of context, but this is fun to say that, it's self-interest that gives us everything we want. And then we could take that a step further. This was a movie character, fictional, but it got traction. Greed is good, from Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street. Okay. So again, the rationale is, if I act in my own interest, I'm going to do things that will be beneficial to you. And there's some truth to that. Let's talk briefly about principal agent theory, which is used in a lot of discussions. It's basically saying there's a relationship where one party or the principal delegates work to another, the agent. So think about it: employer, employee, owner, employee. So it's very common in many organizations. But the core issue is agents don't always act in the best interest of the principals. So some of the challenges, again, are information asymmetry. The agents know more than the principals, but a big one is misaligned incentives. So there's different goals between the principals and the agents. So, if I'm doing a hard, sweaty job, the owner of the business, it's in their interest for me to work hard and sweat and get the job done. Maybe it's in my interest to play on my phone and take it easy and still get paid. So one of the solutions they talk about is aligning incentives. So there's a lot of effort when you get into studies on compensation and things like that, pay for performance, align the incentives, monitor the accountability systems, and then have clear goals and transparency. But if you're to summarize this, it's basically saying the principals must bribe the agents to do their bidding and watch over them so they don't cheat. Okay. So again, back to this, is this successful? Or is there something missing? If you have all this, you can have a successful, profitable business. You can have a successful career. Anybody think something is missing? Well, let's look at some other motivations. So is there more than the bottom line to success? So back to the question of what motivates entrepreneurs and employees. Another Adam Smith quote, actually written before. Adam Smith is also a moral philosopher in addition to an economist. Says there, essentially his quote saying, there's something in us that makes us care about other people, that we derive pleasure through seeing other people benefit and have good experience. There's also a management theory called Hertzberg's two-factor theory that posits that there are hygiene factors such as pay, work environment, things like that, that they prevent dissatisfaction, but they're not motivators. The motivators are the things that create satisfaction. So the idea behind this theory is to find out what are the motivators. So how does this relate to a career? If we have all this, we could have, at least on paper, a successful career, but maybe there's something missing. And I'm trying to keep it in terms of the same ability. I call it relatability, but really it's meaningfulness. Does what you're doing have meaning? And do you derive significance from that meaning? Okay, what about business? Is there another element? And some posit, yes, responsibility is another important element. So this is, the top three we talked about. You have to have those in order to make the financially sustainable business. But the fourth element is it really good for society? I mean, we could take certain examples and say like methamphetamine. Is it desirable? Yeah, to certain people it is. Is it feasible? Yeah, we know how to make it. Is it viable? A lot of people make a lot of money off of it. Is it responsible? No, it doesn't help society. So this is where we introduce a concept called a triple bottom line. So what is the triple bottom line? We look at responsibility, again, to keep it short, they call 3 Ps. So people and planet, is it good for people? Does it harm the environment? And then the third one is profit, because it's necessary to make profits to stay in business, or at least minimum break even. And even with nonprofits, the goal is you got to at least break even. You're not in there to make a profit. So do businesses have a social responsibility? Here's a quote from a much more famous alumnus than me, Nobel laureate in economics, Milton Friedman. The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. Again, this quote sometimes gets taken out of context. He did say, you still need to obey the rules and be legal and things like that. But within those parameters, that's your social responsibility. So some call that the Friedman doctrine or shareholder primacy. And that's where the term, maximizing shareholder return on equity came from. That was the thought behind that. And again, he has a whole essay that you can find online and read, his reasoning behind it. And he has some valid arguments. But let's look at some statistics on employee engagement and see how that's working out. So I took these statistics from this 8 Habits. Anybody ever read this book? So probably his more famous book was called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Anybody heard of that? It was rated by some as the most influential business book, or one of the most influential business books of the 20th century. But again, here's some stats he cites from a Harris poll, and these are from 2004. And I did a quick look on some newer stats to say, did anything change? And I ran out of time and didn't get to update everything. But my quick view is that it hasn't changed a whole lot. So what are these stats? 37% of, this is employee surveys, 37% said they have a clear understanding of what their organization is trying to achieve and why. 1 in 5 was enthusiastic about their team and organizational goals. 1 in 5 workers said they have a clear line of sight between their tasks and the organization and team's goals. 15% said their organization fully enables them to execute key goals. And 15% felt they worked in a high trust environment. And finally, 17% felt their organization fosters open communication that is respectful in differing opinions and results in new and better ideas.
This is our staff survey.
If I were, business management person, that doesn't sound very good. I would hope my organization would do a lot better. But yeah, this is very large scale survey. So meanwhile, back in Japan, so I'm going back to my corporate job where I had a comfortable salary and other nice benefits. I had a discussion with one of my managers. So basically I had a group of commodity managers working for me. I had a $140 million budget I was in charge of, and each of these commodity managers were assigned certain commodities that they had to buy and manage. And one day at lunchtime it happened that I guess everybody else had gone to lunch, and one of my commodity managers had he was still at his desk doing something, and we just kind of struck up a conversation. And I asked him, we were chatting, but then I asked, what's the least favorite thing about your job? And kind of thought a minute, and I guess he felt safe to answer. So I'm paraphrasing because we were talking in Japanese, but he basically said, one of the commodities I manage are, like metal enclosures for this telecom equipment, and we're dealing with small local suppliers. And I know their business is pretty well. And I know they're running on really tight margins. And I still have to go in and squeeze them for price reductions, even though I know they really can't afford it. It's part of my job. That's something I don't really like. So I kind of ruminated on that a bit. Goes, well, what is this? This is negotiation. That's like the revered skill in business. You're a great negotiator. You're on a pedestal if you're a great negotiator. And I thought about what's happening with these negotiations. Is there value being created? And I came to the conclusion that no, there's no value being created in this. Actually, value is being destroyed because of the transaction costs, the costs of the negotiation. But it's essentially, you have a pie and you're arguing over who gets the biggest piece of pie. So that kind of got me on a path to, I want to do something that actually creates value. Not to say that everything that job didn't, but I guess the other part of the job was it seemed like the higher up the food chain I got, the quicker the job got to be boring. So I was doing, when I was an engineer, I had a lot of interesting challenges, but no strategic ability to make any changes. And then kind of as a mid-level executive, there was a lot of, go-between and tap dancing between management and corporate senior management, things like that. So job was kind of getting boring, but anyway, make a long story short, the company was trying to consolidate their two facilities into one. They offered buyouts, and so I took the buyout, went back to the US and had another entrepreneurial experience. So this time I had been thinking about it, and I guess part of the thing while I was in the corporate world, I had a lot of ideas of stuff I wanted to research, and I would write these down, but I never had time to act on them because I was too busy, in crisis management mode. So I had a whole list of stuff I wanted to learn more about. But one of the things in the course of learning was I saw that affordable housing is a big issue, and also studied sustainability somewhat, that a lot of the housing is not good for your health, it's not good for the environment, it's not sustainable. So I guess my idea was to use some of the severance package money to start a business building affordable, sustainable housing. And so I started out that. I got some additional training. I thought, okay, I'm an engineer. I've had project management training. I've got an MBA. How hard can that be? I read some books. I've actually been around construction projects. And, it turned out it was a little more challenging than I thought. But something else happened during that time, and that was the financial meltdown and the Great Recession. When things are starting to maybe look promising, then kind of the door got slammed on residential housing. Nobody was approving anything. Nothing was getting built. So I happened to be in Clemson, South Carolina, which is another story why I ended up there. But Clemson University, I was looking at, they had a program that I started, or I applied to and got in. It was a PhD program in public policy, interdisciplinary program, and a lot of economics and political science management. I actually had a sociologist on my dissertation committee, but anyway, in the process of getting the PhD, I got a master's in applied economics and statistics, and then finished. My concentration was in rural and regional economic development policy. And then during the time, or actually fairly early, I talked to one of my professors. I talked to all of my professors, but I talked to, one of them asked me, why did you leave the corporate world? And the answer I could come up with was, maximizing shareholder return on equity was no longer motivating to me. But another one, I had done a little bit of research at a paper on co-ops, and one of them said, hey, have you looked into social entrepreneurship? At the time, it was pretty new as a disciplinary field. And so I looked into it more and it seemed interesting. So I ended up, focusing my dissertation on social entrepreneurship and economic development policy. So here's the question: what is social entrepreneurship? Anybody want to take a shot at it?
Carol.
Oh, Carol, okay.
Doing good and making money while you're doing good.
Doing good and making money. Okay, that could qualify, I think, as a definition. Actually, there were no consensus definitions of it. When I studied the literature, everybody had they would start their paper saying, we define social entrepreneurship as blah, blah, blah. So I spent 50 pages of my first dissertation chapter defining social entrepreneurship. And I came up with, here's my self-serving, self-citation thing. Basically, I analyzed a lot of literature, what was in it, using corpus linguistic analysis, but it came up with the idea that it's best defined on a multidimensional continuum. It's like, it's not a binary thing. You are a social entrepreneur, you're not a social entrepreneur. So, and the multidimensional continuum had entrepreneurial elements in it, had social elements in it, and it had some operational elements in it. Just one example, and if you want to read 50 pages, I can send you a copy. But, so here's a continuum. So on the social business end, or the social entrepreneurship end, would be profit as a means to an end. Okay, so if we go to the other end of the continuum, profit is the end. Okay, so that would be the, profit is, increasing your profit is what matters. But in actuality, in studying entrepreneurship, most of their motivations lie somewhere in between. Yeah, they want to earn money, but a lot of the startups, they have a social goal in mind when they start up as well. So again, somewhere along this continuum is where most entrepreneurs reside. So it might help to give an example of what is a social entrepreneur. Maybe I should say, who is a social entrepreneur? So here's one example. His name is Fabio Rosa, I'm pronouncing that right, from Brazil. Again, if we go back to the problem-solving initiative, what problem did he recognize? So in rural Brazil, the energy companies used expensive distribution technology, but if you look at kind of these lower density population areas, it wasn't cost effective to distribute power there, so they just bypassed them. So essentially it left the farmers in that area either without electricity, where they had to do manual labor, or they had to use expensive, dirty diesel generators. And so what Mr. Rosa did is he worked with, I think there was a university professor he worked with, but they developed low-cost scalable solar power electric systems that could drop in these rural areas and generate electricity a lot cheaper and cleaner. And it raised the livelihood of the farmers. And so his motivation was financially sustainable economic development with environmental stewardship. And there's lots of other examples. If you want to see, I can give you some references. Okay, what is a social enterprise? So you think, well, that's something a social enterprise entrepreneur starts. So the enterprise is the organization, the entrepreneur is the person. Here's another example. Greyston Bakery, they're in New York. So the problem they addressed is unemployable individuals, and I put that in quotes, cannot support themselves. And by unemployable, it's usually like ex-convicts, ex-addicts, other people with low skills, in some cases, immigrants with low language skills. So they're not employable, so what are they going to do? They're vulnerable to crime, homelessness, exploitation, etc. So their solution was they created this business with opening hiring with on-the-job skills training. So by opening hiring, it means if we have an opening and you're next in line, you got the job. No resume, no interview, you got the job. So again, their motivation was enabling the unemployable to integrate into the mainstream economy. So it had to, have a pipeline effect that they would train people working at the bakery, and then they could, get other jobs. And sometimes they stayed within the bakery and progressed as well. But the idea was to raise their standard of living through job training and skills. And I think that their motto or their mission statement is kind of interesting and telling. It kind of summarizes their intent. It says, we don't hire people to bake brownies, we bake brownies to hire people. And there's a lot of social entrepreneurship business models, and I don't have time to talk about business models, but business model, I guess in a short sense, is your plan for paying your bills, essentially. But one I'll briefly introduce is a complementary enterprise. What that is there are a lot of social entrepreneurs that will use a for-profit business maybe to fund a nonprofit where there's no income generation possibility. If you think of maybe something where your target social issue is children or perhaps homeless animals or whatever. Homeless animals and children don't have money to buy your product. So in some cases they use the for-profit to fund these other ventures. And then there's a whole bunch of other business models. So I'm going to talk briefly about some research I've done on social entrepreneurship. I'll go through this very quickly, but it is an extension of one of the studies I did for my dissertation. This was in 2016, and this time around I had someone help me with the tedious process of collecting data and updating the literature review. So we had a Lion student, Sajani Sharma, who's here. And so we updated the study, did some different analysis, and we presented at the Akita International University Research Showcase in November. And just last week submitted the paper to a journal for review, so hoping it is interesting enough to them. But the idea behind it was, again, looking at startups. The main research question is, does having a social mission impact prospects of a firm's survival and longevity? Or we could restate it as, do social entrepreneurs face greater risk from failure than conventional entrepreneurs? Or we could say, is it feasible to balance achieving social impact goals with financial sustainability? As most people have heard, startup businesses have a pretty high failure rate. And so we wanted to compare, the social enterprises with the conventional enterprises. We used benefit corporations as a proxy for social venture. And I'll talk about what a benefit corporation is if you haven't heard of them. They were very new when the original study was done. So we thought, since some time has passed, maybe there's some different results of the study. We also added a dimension of longevity to the analysis. So what is a business or a benefit corporation? Essentially, it's a legal form of business structure, like a S Corp or a C Corp or a LLC. And as far as tax purposes, it's treated as a conventional corporation. So they've only been around since 2010. Maryland was the first state to pass the statute, and then they've since spread to over at least 37 states. But the latest data I could find had benefit corporation. Arkansas is included. They passed one in 2013. So the statutes typically require the organization to state a public benefit that they're going to do. So why would you do it? One reason would be to protect the founder's social mission and give them some legal protection for considering non-shareholder interests. So it's kind of going against the shareholder primacy. It's saying, if we're going to be a benefit corporation, we're going to balance social goals with financial goals. We mentioned some of the reasons. You could also talk about maybe marketing purposes. Some people are willing to pay a premium. I don't know why this is jumping. There could be operational savings. So you could have people that are more motivated to work for a social mission, which would lead to higher productivity. And let's look at the public benefits list. So this is from the model legislation, but most states use this, so that I won't go through all of them, but just the first two give an example of these are public benefits, providing low income or underserved individuals or communities with beneficial products or services. And then second would be promoting economic opportunities for individuals or community beyond the creation of jobs in the ordinary course of business. So, any business is gonna, if you're gonna expand, you're gonna create jobs, but to qualify, you'd have to do something beyond just that. And then there's other, with the environment, health, education, things like that. So essentially, when you form a benefit corporation, you would typically state that you are going to provide one of these social benefits. Running short on time, so I'll skip some of this. Here's a few benefit corporations you may have heard of, some of them probably. A lot of these firms are also certified B Corps. If you go to Kroger and look on the right label, there will be a thing that says certified B Corp. It's not necessarily the same. A certified B Corp is a third-party certification, whereas a benefit corporation is a legal form. But a lot of times they're both the same because they'll organize as a benefit corporation and then become a certified B Corp. But it's not necessarily that they're equal. Okay, so there's factors that impact survival rates of benefit corporations. And there's a few listed there. There's a lot of factors. Again, we mentioned some. More loyal and productive workers could decrease risk of failure. More loyal customers could, decreases the price elasticity of demand and increases the premium customers are willing to pay. So there is some research showing socially conscious customers are willing to pay premiums. Socially conscious investors may be willing to accept lower returns. So they will invest without, the bigger expectation of returns. And then there's some other things that argue that benefit corporations could have a higher survival rate. But on the flip side, there's things that say, well, they could be at greater risk of failure. First one, probably the biggest, is uncompensated additional costs in creating the public benefit. And that includes compliance costs. There's also more complexity. So if you're only focused on profit maximization, that's one-dimensional, whereas if you're trying to balance a social goal, that makes things more difficult. So that can increase risk of failure. Also, if you forego profits to create a social benefit, that's less to reinvest in your company. And then there's a couple others here, but essentially there's reasons that they could fail faster or more often, or there's reasons that they could survive longer. So when we created the hypothesis, there wasn't enough quantitative information to really say that one effect is going to dominate. So for our null hypothesis, we just said benefit corporations are no more prone to failure than conventional corporations. Okay, and then we collected data, and this is the important but the tedious part of the study. We did look at benefit corporations from California, the reason being it's a large state, and the statute started in January 2012, so there's more data available. The first study that was done, it had only been a couple of years, so we're thinking, maybe something different will show up after more than 10 years. We also added another dimension of duration for those firms that failed. How fast did they fail? How long were they able to continue before they failed? And our definition of success was just looking at the publicly available data on the California Secretary of State website. If they were active, meaning their status is active, it means they're able to do business. If it was another status, we'd call that a failure. Let's see. So essentially, we did a test of two proportions. We were looking at different failure rates. And then we looked at the duration, did another test on that. But we did a bunch of different comparisons, more than in the original study. So we looked at, year by year benefit corporations versus conventional corporations, which I had mentioned. We took random samples of the conventional corporation. So we're using the same organizations in the current study as in the previous study. But we looked at different ways of comparing the data, and we lumped them into groups, all benefit corporations from that time period versus all benefit corporations. And there were some things we needed to do to clean the data, like some of the corporations in the study, they were amended. So it means they were existing corporations that changed their corporate form. So we kind of removed them from some of the analyses because it wasn't really an apples to apples comparison when you're looking at an established business versus a startup. So after all that, you can look at all the numbers, kind of a not that interesting result in that we failed to reject the null hypothesis. Although we could look in 2012, there was kind of a weak significance, p-value of 0.08 for the companies, the newly formed benefit corporations compared to conventional. But if we went forward to 2025, that had disappeared completely. Another interesting thing is if we look, again, not an apples to apples comparison, but the amended benefit corporations had a success rate of about 75% versus about 25% for startups. So at a very low p-value, but that kind of indicates that they're, it's a viable thing that they didn't have a significantly high failure rate from reorganizing into benefit corporations. So I guess I kind of covered that no significant difference. If we look at the duration analysis of how long did the ones that failed, how long did they last before they failed, we started again with a similar null hypothesis of no difference. If we plot the distributions of this is how long they were in operation before they failed, they look fairly similar. The mean was a bit higher for conventional corporations, but the median was very close. And then we did a statistical test, the two-sample Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, and shout out to Dr. Sloga for suggesting that as a test. But again, we found kind of an uninteresting result of no difference. So what does that mean? Well, I think above all, it shows that social entrepreneurs can balance social mission with financial sustainability. So it does provide some evidence that say that you're not putting yourself at a much higher risk that, by having a social mission than by not having a social mission. And then I'll skip over these other research findings so we can get back to the conclusion. There's a lot of things we could do for further study. So circling back to why am I here? So going back to my career mission, I thought of, I've always loved learning, so I turned that in, with the love of learning, I have a desire to help others learn. And I think part of my upbringing was the importance of making a contribution, making a positive difference in the world. So I think helping others understand how business and economics can be a force for good or for bad in the world is important, and it can help others find personal significance. And if we look at social problems, they are not solved by singular skills. They require multidisciplinary skills. But the entrepreneurial mindset is important. I believe it can go a long ways in solving problems. And again, I could give you one example of a social entrepreneur, but there are hundreds of examples of social entrepreneurs, and a lot of them didn't have business degrees, and a lot of them, almost none of them, were totally on their own. They all had collaborators with them. So business skills are necessary but insufficient to solve the problems. And so there's some collaboration opportunities. You could think about multidisciplinary recruiting events focused on solutions to social problems. Cross-disciplinary class projects, cross-disciplinary community projects, and probably a lot of others that I didn't have time to come up with and write down. But if you're interested in possibly doing that, be happy to talk with you more. And finally, back to the pineapple. I didn't notice this when I bought the pineapple, but I looked closer at the label. What do you see on there? 3 Ps, they changed it a little bit different. They left off profit, which I'm too cynical to believe that they don't care about that. But I guess what this does show is that corporations have taken notice. Big corporations say at least, I don't know if they're walking the walk, but at least they think they need to talk the talk. And then on the backside, there's a QR code that I scanned that came up with this, regenerative agriculture. And, talking about how they use regenerative agriculture, environmental sustainability and things to grow their pineapple. So I just thought that was kind of interesting way to end up. So anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments?
So in your hypothesis testing, right, that if I read it correctly, that level of significance, whatever you had when you used the data from the earlier years that disappeared in 2025, was there or were there other variables to control the change in the policy environment from earlier years to 2025? Policy environment, like a lot of changes took place after that in terms of government or state level policies?
We weren't aware of any and that's something we can dig in deeper. We could look at divide corporations, we could take the NAICS code, the industry code, and see if there's differences. We could look at a lot more states instead of just California.
Yeah, so I was curious if you've done any kind of historical work on this and whether or not you think the rise in social entrepreneurship is a signal of the kind of faith in capitalism and the growth of inequality. Because in the 1930s, we saw after the Great Depression, a lot of companies started focusing social benefits. So I went to grad school in upstate New York, and in Johnson City, Endicott, IBM and the Endicott Johnson Shoe Company provided housing at cost, public parks, all these types of things as the kind of benefits for their employees, recognizing that the social situation after the Great Depression was literally killing people. And so we went towards a very social approach to business that sustained really well until the 70s and the rise of shareholder, shareholder profit.
Primacy.
Primacy, there you go. So I was wondering if you think that there are some corollaries in maybe our lack of faith in capitalism and the rise of social entrepreneurship, or even some historical similarities you can draw out there.
Well, I think that's definitely an issue that, especially with the newer generations, they're many critics of capitalism, and there are obvious problems. It's easy to cite examples of corruption and greed and things like that in capitalism. For one of my classes, I spent 5 minutes doing internet search and came up with a whole bunch of examples of businesses owners getting arrested for fraud and convicted of fraud and things like that. But I think part of it too, maybe, and this is just a thought that I don't really have any data to back up, but when we get to the point, if you go back to the Depression, people were on the verge of not surviving. And I think a lot of people, when survival is no longer questioned, you start looking for meaning. And you can think about Maslow's hierarchy, that I'm not worried about starving, this job is boring and meaningless, so I want to find something with more meaning.
Peter, is there any information on how B corporations perform in terms of financial returns versus for-profit companies? And I'm not aware of if there's mutual funds that you can invest in.
There is. I haven't researched that a lot, but I know there's some stuff in the literature that I've run across. And in fact, there's more literature on certified B Corps than there is on benefit corporations as far as financial performance. But there isn't much on startups. They don't differentiate startups. I think that's kind of where our study is a little bit different, is we're focused on the entrepreneurial startup versus just lumping everybody together and looking at financial performance. But there's definitely some stuff in the literature on that.
Yeah, because is there shareholder pressure? for like a certified B Corp to hit certain performance goals?
I would imagine there is, and there was it last week, there was a certified B Corp that was kind of hit the news. I don't know if you're Allbirds, where they basically switched their mission to
Now they're AI.
Yeah, we're gonna do AI, and it's like, how's that, social, so.
Good luck with
Yeah,
that.
there's an issue with, greenwashing.
Right.
You heard that term. That's a problem.
How much do you see, so the social entrepreneurship and social responsibility, how much do you see it making headway in business programs and business schools, right? I mean, it's cool that this could be a part and people who are interested are thinking about it, but is it still sort of on the margins? Like, we're all gonna make a profit, and if you wanna do like this nice thing, that's great, but if you don't, then it's not part of what we're learning about. Sort of like ethics is on the side if you want to be interested in that.
Well, I think a lot of that's gonna be driven by student interest. And some of it, I think there's an opportunity to market this to students that do care about it, because there are a lot of people, saying capitalism is broken. And then you gotta think, well, what are the alternatives? There's one that doesn't get talked too much about, but a lot of them are saying, well, socialism is the alternative. Well, where's a large scale example of successful socialism? That's difficult. Yeah.
Just a quick comment to, I think what Jason and Matthew was saying, that in fact, after the 2003, that Enron and energy company scandal and all that, right after that, most of these schools started to open a center for ethics and all that. That whole thing died. Another one is, I think around Second World War time, price control by the US government was much more effective because people's attitude was different because of the war and all that. So that is why I was asking that change, whether that came from some sort of change from the society, that people started thinking differently. So that could be very relevant here.
But the perception is a quantitative aspect of things. I mean, this is a quantitative study, but perception on changes is confounding variable. I think that's mostly explored with qualitative research, right? You can't control for that in this research.
In our study, we didn't control for that. Good question. Yes.
Like most of the countries like in India, you have 2% of your average turnover for like social responsibility, CSR missions, right? Is it still better or required by those countries to promote social enterprises in general? Because every profit making industry is putting like 2% of their turnovers to CSR missions in general.
In India, you're saying? Yeah, I don't believe that's a requirement in the US. Now, there are corporations that state, I mean, 1% is the one I hear the most, that is we're taking 1% of our profits and donating towards whatever cause, we're trying to support. I think Patagonia is an example of that, but there's no, requirement to do that. That's voluntary.
Do you think like those kind of countries should still like promote social enterprises in general, or let it be?
Well, I think there is a benefit to promoting social enterprise in that, if they're having to set aside 2% for social things, a lot of companies would just view that as another tax, essentially. So it's really not, motivating the behavior or anything. It would be the same as if, we added a tax for, whatever it is to achieve social goals on corporate profits. So I think, with a voluntary promotion, that's where the solution is. Again, a lot of the corporations, again, I'm a little bit cynical, having worked for several multi-billion-dollar corporations. They want to look good more than they want to be good. And again, there's a lot of good people working for them, so I don't want to throw everybody under the bus. But the appearance is the most important thing. If profit is your main motive.
Peter?